I recently returned from the Holy Land, and one thing became painfully clear to me. The people paying the price for our political arguments are almost always the same: ordinary people, civilians, women and children, grandmas and grandpas, Christians in Gaza, families in the West Bank, believers persecuted in China, migrants risking everything to cross our border. Today, I'm joined by Kelsey Reinhardt, president of Catholic Vote, one of the most influential Catholic advocacy organizations in the United States. We're going to talk about immigration, Iran, Gaza, the West Bank, the Vatican's deal with the Chinese Communist Party, and the role Catholics should play in shaping the future of American politics. Kelsey runs one of the most important organizations in the world. Their email, The Loop, I think is probably the most influential political email in the country. You need to make sure that you sign up for it. And I believe Kelsey has one of the most challenging jobs in the world because as Catholics, we're hard-headed, and a lot of these issues are complex and divisive. And the role of Catholic Vote is to keep us all together and make sure that we have some measure of political influence in the elections to come. This episode, as always, is being brought to you by the Vulnerable People Project, standing in solidarity with the most vulnerable people in the world when the world is left. Go to our website, vulnerablepeopleproject.com. Look around, see what we do. We stand with the persecuted church in China, in Nigeria, across the Middle East, and through Central Asia. And you can become a part of that by becoming a monthly donor today. All right, on to my interview with the great, courageous, and wonderful Kelsey Reinhardt, president of Catholic Vote. Kelsey Reinhardt, welcome to the Jason Jones Show.
Always great to be with you, Jason.
Is it though, Kelsey? Is it great to be with me? Tell the truth.
It's fantastic, whether it's Rome or the Middle
Well,
East.
Rome was great.
or
Okay.
here.
The reason I say that is every day when I was after college, I was chief of staff for a state representative. And every morning when I would read the local newspaper, I would get butterflies because depending what the editorial was or what was on the front page of the paper, it could make my job very difficult as the chief of staff for a state representative. And now I get nervous every morning when I turn on the news or grab the paper or the X because I worry for my friend Kelsey, because I feel like the toughest job in the world today would be to work at Catholic Vote. Is that fair to say?
That could be fair to say. Yes, we're definitely experiencing daily the constant need to weigh in on things that are explosive, whether you weighed 1 foot to the right or 1 foot to the left. So it certainly is a job that keeps you on your toes.
There's this influencer, his name is JP. He's like a health guru or something like this. And he became kind of famous during COVID, and he did a spoof on no matter what position he takes now, half of his own audience that used to love him hates him. And what a thankless position it is. So I want, as I understand it, the mission of Catholic Vote is to help Catholics engage in the political life of our community, rooted in our faith and our tradition, and applying Catholic social teaching to the problems of today. And those problems, and those usually touch things like, obviously, bioethical issues like abortion, embryo destruction, embryo destructive stem cell research, in vitro fertilization, immigration, war. And so today, sort of all of the third rails of politics are presenting themselves in rapid succession every day, day after day, since the Trump administration began. And I have to imagine it's a bit bewildering because while your mission is to help Catholics do this, you also have to do it in a way that harnesses the Catholic vote so that it can have influence. And
That's
if we fracture as a community, we don't have influence. Yet if we drift from the core beliefs of our faith, why have any influence at all? It's pointless.
Exactly.
Can you address sort of that balancing act that you're having to deal with?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think that that's exactly it. If Catholics don't have a seat at the table, they're on the menu. And so our goal is really to advance the Catholic voice in the public square. But right now, what you see is that it again, you're walking this line, and there are prudential issues, right, where you can disagree. There might be 100, there might be 1,000 ways to implement immigration justly. What we talk about often are the ways to not implement immigration justly. So, on this side and on this side, we try and steer people towards a middle prudential. And, looking at the issues in front of us today, I was just speaking with someone recently about what's happening inside Catholicism with the commentaries of Nick Fuentes and Candace Owens. And you have this group of Catholics who are increasingly anti-Semitic, and there's a real question in all of this, which is, to what extent can Catholics criticize the state of Israel without being anti-Semitic? But then there's also these outliers on this side that would fall into anti-Semitism, or these outliers on another side that say there can be no criticism whatsoever. So walking those lines, Jason, is a very is a very, very tough job.
I would say in my own friend group, I have friends that I really do believe are struggling with anti-Semitism, and I also have friends that are virulent anti-Arab bigots, and they're all Catholics. One side will use, sweeping language rather than criticizing the state of Israel. They'll make it about the Jews. Rather than talking about Hamas, they'll say all Muslims or all Arabs are violent and vile and incompatible with our civilization. So you have this horrible struggle where you and I have a heart for migrants, and that's what led me for 3 decades to advocate for border security and workplace enforcement. So we wouldn't be luring migrants into an underground economy where they would be exploited. We wouldn't be driving down the wages of the most vulnerable Americans. And yet, we've seen people take the real problem of our broken border, and they've used it to foment bigotry and hatred towards Latinos. Most of those people coming across that border are members of the mystical body of Christ. And I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Hey, we want to secure the border, but our hearts break for migrants. And we're so grateful that we're privileged. And we understand that we need the rule of law. We need secure borders. We need workplace enforcement. But that doesn't mean we need to dehumanize migrants. And so I see the Catholic vote. It is quite a struggle, right? Where you'll have those advocating for open borders, which really violates the dignity of migrants and leads to their exploitation and brutalization. But they'll do it in the language of concern for migrants. And then
Right.
you'll have those advocating for policies that could actually protect migrants, but they sound like they're animated by bigotry. And if I could, well, I'll let you address that, and then I have even a tougher thing to ask you. But
No,
would
I
you want to
mean,
address that?
I think we Catholic Vote has been addressing this all year. There's something to the fact that we have to look at the reality of these policies and what they're actually implementing. But there's also something to the fact that we need to look at, the language that we use. And as I like to say, the the how should not be obfuscated by the why. So,
Mm.
why are you doing this, right? You're doing this to protect migrants, you're doing this to protect vulnerable Americans, you're doing this to be faithful to Catholic social teaching, to accept, it says in Catholic social teaching, to the extent their countries are able to receive these immigrants, and so, we have to have really hard hitting dialogue about, what is that extent, and what does that look like for migrants? What does that look like for Americans? But then, the how can sometimes be so disturbing that it causes question marks about the why, like, why are we doing this? And it's like, well, no, just because somebody has taken this enforcement, the how to an extreme that they shouldn't have doesn't mean that there shouldn't be, a why we do this, why, this is legitimate according to Catholic social teaching. So those things, those debates have been part of Catholic Vote this entire year, moving along, looking at even the latest USCCB statement on birthright citizenship. They filed an amicus brief before the Supreme Court, and we had to once again remind um, even the USCCB, which is just an arm of the bishops. It doesn't necessarily mean that every bishop has reviewed this or that it's dogmatic, but we had to remind them, look, birthright citizenship has not been upheld in the past. It's not upheld in most places in Europe. It hasn't been a part of Catholic monarchies. It can't be that we are morally obligated to give
As a
birthright.
matter of fact, I think we're the only country in the world that has birthright citizenship. Is that correct?
There are
I
some
mean,
in Latin America that
okay.
do birthright, but it's mostly a Western Hemisphere phenomenon, and therefore it cannot be a universal moral aptitude that we are saying. So anyway, it's been an
And
interesting.
what frustrates me with them deciding to weigh in there, birthright citizenship is being abused by wealthy foreigners, whether from China or from the Middle East or India. And as Catholics, I really want to have a preferential option for the vulnerable. And
Yeah.
so that makes me want to prioritize the dreamers, those who were young children brought here by their migrant worker parents. These to me should be really, as Catholics, our focus, or securing the border, shutting down human sex trafficking, protect migrant workers from economic and sexual exploitation. And this is the frustration, right? Like we see coming from the church. You may have someone like Supich who is speaks with courage and clarity when it comes to, say, the war in Iran, but he refuses to address the root problems of our migrant crisis in the United States, or he compares abortion to minimum wage. And then you'll have someone like Bishop Barron, who has never said one word about um, settler violence against Christians in the West Bank, the genocide in Gaza. Today, a Maronite priest, or yesterday, appears to be directly targeted, assassinated by the IDF for his courageous statements a few days earlier that he wouldn't leave his neighborhood as the IDF pushed in. And, so Bishop Barron has never once spoken up for the Christians in the Holy Land. He has never once spoken out to break the CCP deal. You have someone like Cardinal Parolin, who's been really a force to end the ethnic cleansing in Gaza, but then he is sort of shrugged at China's organ harvesting program. So as a lay Catholic person, it's frustrating that it seems like a complete, consistent representative in the hierarchy advocating for human dignity grounded in the church's teachings, it's sort of fragmented through different bishops like this. And it's almost as if it's an ideological lines rooted more in the cultural battles than in church teaching.
Well, I certainly think it's hard to find um, one person embodiment, but I mean, to be fair, it is also hard to speak out on every single issue as you do, Jason. So, I think that most people find a lane and stick there. I think the difficulty with our organizations are that it's meant to be very comprehensive. I just want to return back to the birthright citizenship, that comment that you made, though. I mean, we also have to look at how surrogacy is being used in this. I mean, some of the cases that I've seen, they've set up entire houses full of surrogate women in order to create pipelines for Chinese citizens in order to be able to have these U.S. passports and citizenship. And it's disturbing when it's involved, as you say, with these, with the moral complicity around certain things that are so antithetical to Catholic teaching, but also to, American interests.
For me, that's not even, I witnessed it when I lived in Los Angeles 11, 12 years ago. We, in our community, was sort of an upscale, quite expensive, gated community of apartments, but there was very upscale posh. And there were hundreds of Chinese women that would cycle in until they gave birth and then cycle out. And they were constantly cycling them in and cycling them out. We saw this in the H-1 visa battle where they were really fighting hard for visas for Brahmin caste Indians, those from the upper class, those who are privileged, those who are actually the oppressors of Christians, Dalits, and Muslims in India. They're the ones that are getting the first crack at visas here in the United States. I wrote a Substack at the time that said, we should actually continue with this visa program for India, but it should only be for Christians and Dalits. And let's give opportunity to the vulnerable communities. And we'll see how quickly those in the influential, wealthy caste that advocate for these visas would be silent because they weren't fighting for Indians. They were fighting for their own interests and abandoning the most vulnerable Indians. And so can you share with me, how do you, a Catholic vote, balance sort of the church teaching and it's, our church, what I love, what I simply try to do is understand what the church teaches on an issue, and then that's my opinion, right? Because the church is right. Oftentimes, I disagree with the church. When I first became Catholic, I didn't get Mariology. I didn't get why contraception was wrong. I didn't
Yeah.
get this. I didn't get that. And over time, I came to understand that the church has a wisdom that I lack. And so issue after issue after issue, I just look to the church. And I look to I start with the Gospels. I work my way through the church fathers. I try to read every encyclical. And I try to understand what is the church's position on this. And as you said, oftentimes it's prudential, but our ends are universal. So how do you, a Catholic vote, sort of balance the having influence? You can't alienate everybody, while at the same time trying to balance a country's obligation to secure its borders, and as a nation, our responsibility, and as believers, our responsibility to care for the vulnerable and welcome the migrant.
Yeah, Jason. Well, I'm with you that, there's something important about meditating on the church's teachings and on living those deeply, reading about them, studying them, praying through them, and calling yourself to account as well as calling others. But it does often move into a prudential um, realm wherein, at least in the political spheres, where this stuff kind of migrates down into Catholic votes world, um, it then becomes, a question of the real practitioners of these things, right? So I think, for instance, of the 1983 document put out by the USCCB called the Challenge of Peace, and they called for unilateral nuclear disarmament in the face of the Soviet Union. And, Reagan had some advisors, some of whom I understood were Catholic, and they said, actually, what we can do is bankrupt the Soviets by getting into an arms race. And so they went into this arms race because they had inside information as practitioners on the ground about how close the Soviet Union was to bankruptcy. So did they achieve the ends of disarmament and the lowering of the temperature of the Cold War? Yes, through different means. And the means came through a particular expertise and knowledge of the practitioners. So when I look at what we're called to do, does everyone want peace in the world? Yes. What does that look like? How do we get there? Does everyone want a just and humane border? Yes. Well, hopefully, yes. We can validly question whether or not some people want peace and whether or not some people want borders. But I mean, I think for those that are acting in good faith with the church's teaching, we can say, what does this look like? And so Catholic Vote exists to further the dialogue, to inform the citizens, and then to empower them as the laity to say, now stand on this and also pray into it. And that's kind of how we move, into these coalitional efforts that we have.
Well, I mean, I think that's important. Can I move to the Middle East?
Oh, sure.
Okay. At a Vulnerable People Project, we've launched a campaign called Save West Bank Christians. With the war in Iran distracting everyone, settlers in the West Bank have made a concerted effort to take land from Christians in the town of Tebe. There have been relentless settler attacks over the past several days and weeks. In Bethlehem, there's a new settlement, Shtema, that has been approved. This settlement would effectively end the Christian communities in Bethlehem and Bethsahur. And it's been announced that they're going to destroy 11,000 homes in Bethlehem and Bethsahur. Those would be 11,000 predominantly Christian homes. It seems like we as Catholics and also the Orthodox have a real commitment to the ancient church in the Holy Land, not just in Palestine and Israel, but across the Middle East. But unfortunately, evangelical Christians, they seem to have a lot of sway and a lot of power. Even though I think we as Catholics are a much larger community than dispensationalist Christians, which are even a small fraction of evangelicals and Protestants generally. But you can see with Ambassador Huckabee excusing every crime the state of Israel or settlers commit against our Catholic brothers and sisters. So how do we as Catholics successfully advocate for our brothers and sisters in Christ who are being brutalized by the state of Israel? Well, Protestant Christians, evangelicals, specifically dispensationalists, seem to shrug, like the editor of Babylon Bee is relentlessly attacking the Holy Father. The editor-in-chief of Babylon Bee said that there are no Christians in Gaza because Catholics and Orthodox aren't Christians. How do we fight for our co-religionists when in our own coalition as conservatives, evangelicals are fighting to undermine our ability to advocate for them?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is tied into the larger question too about some of the legitimate grievances that are held against you know, aspects of or podcasters in with Catholic names who are advocating for anti-Semitic positions. So, I mean,
Can you
I'm
tell
sure.
me what some of those anti-Semitic positions, what would be an I don't
Well, I mean, I think I'm speaking here specifically about some of the Candace Owens and Nick Fuentes, um larger larger. I have not seen the documented proof around some of the larger conspiracies that they have around um some of the things that are being said. So, if you want to show me the proof about some of the
honestly, I don't watch Nick Fuentes. I don't know what he says, but I'm
yeah.
sure he spews Jew hatred. But I know that people like Carrie Prejean Bowler was accused of anti-Semitism by simply stating that we as Catholics cannot be Zionists, um, and that we should be advocating for Israel to stop stealing the land of Catholics and killing so they throw that around a lot. I'm surprised I haven't yet been smeared as an anti-Semite. But I'm sure my day is coming. So that's why it's to me, I do see much more virulent rhetoric. For example, here's my frustration. Miss Prejean Bolger was kicked off of this commission, but everyone on that commission is almost daily on X mocking the Pope, mocking Catholics. So Eric Metaxas, this goofball from Babylon Bee, they're constantly attacking the church, constantly insulting the Holy Father. They snicker when Catholics are murdered by Israeli snipers inside churches. Silence, or people like Congressman Randy Fine from Florida, when he's shown a picture of a dead Palestinian child, he goes, "Thanks for the picture. I need more of these." And that kind of rhetoric to me is so much more hyperbolic and vicious and cruel of a genocide that's actually happening. There's no consequences for those folks. But when a Catholic like Carrie Prejean Bowler says, "Hey, stop the settler attacks in the West Bank," she's labeled an anti-Semite.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things here. One is that the smear game is happening on both ends. And I would say, the second is, I mean, I watched the hearing that she participated in right before she was asked to be removed, and while she made, valid points, I thought that it was um an interesting outlet in which to make them. So, it was in the middle of a hearing on anti-Semitism on college campuses, which is a very real thing in which, most of the conversation was centered around. And, she wanted to flip that into a different conversation, different conversation that may be worth having, but certainly the venue was a bit unusual, in terms of, her choice of a topic and tone, I would say, in the midst of what was, a very patterned event. So, I mean, certainly there's no doubt that she can raise those questions, and there's no doubt that she's been attacked for holding some of those positions. But there's also a little bit of nuance in the way in which, her initial removal from the committee occurred. Um, that
But I
I
think
would.
maybe her point was that a lot of just well-meaning young people who are just scandalized by the brutality that was happening in Gaza are being called anti-Semitic because of their protests. And I know a lot of these protest leaders are actually Jewish themselves. uh, uh, um, Kerry invited several people to the committee to present. I was one of them. I was denied permission to address. And she invited several rabbis. They were also denied. And when Kerry asked me to come, I said, Kerry, I hope you don't mind, but I would actually like to speak. I didn't know really what the meeting was about. I said, I want to address the rise of anti Semitism and Jew hatred on college campuses. And I didn't even, I said, I want to talk about this. And the cause is commissions like this equating criticizing the state of Israel with anti-Semitism. So then what young kids hear is, oh, Jews are responsible for what I'm seeing, instead of, oh, the state of Israel is responsible.
Mhm.
Not Israeli citizens, not Jews generally. That would be like blaming me for the Falkland Islands invasion of the Brits because I'm ethnically English, although my family hasn't lived there for 2 generations. Be absurd. But or blaming us for Obama's drone war, which killed over 1,000 children. We shouldn't be blamed. Um, and it would be silly, So I think that's just the frustration that those of us who have been advocating for Palestinian Christians, whether on college campuses or in podcasts, have to weather comparisons to people like you're like Nick Fuentes, or you're like,
Right.
what? What?
Well, this is where the nuance and the reality on the ground is really important. So as you bring up, the villages, to refocus here into, the truth and where that lies, as opposed to, the both sides here, which are at war with calling each other, different types of names. I would say that we have to look, really carefully at what's happening there. And a lot of the situation there is very worrisome. I mean, the what will happen to the churches in the Middle East, if these numbers, which have been already dramatically affected by, the war, because of most of their economy is based upon tourism. What will happen to those holy sites? What will happen to those people who live there, if these are meant to come through? And it is something that brings up, interesting points, because it's not just about foreign policy at this point, Jason. It's also about, as you mentioned, the conservative coalition and how it decides to regulate these conversations within itself. Because, I think at this point it's just become increasingly clear, um, as you said at the beginning of this podcast, I can't wake up and not be criticized by either side on this issue. Um, if you're pointing out, legitimate facts and disagreements, or if you're saying, well, I would go to here but no further, or I would say that this is true but this is not. I would say that, this tweet about the Pope by the editor of the Babylon Bee, is very is very anti-Catholic. You know, there certainly is just a great deal of messiness that's infecting the domestic politics, and we have to understand where the values are going to lie in this, in this equation. And I think that the real question here is, what does the world look like without a Christian population in Bethlehem? And what happens there? What does the world look like? We've seen it already happen, ironically, with a lot of the Jewish communities in the Middle East when they were forced to move, when the last Jew left Iraq, what happened to the prophet Nehemiah's tomb? It got taken over by the Catholics. Well, now the Catholics are almost the last Catholics left in Iraq, and that's a part of the war, and
And
it's
I've been to the Prophet Nehemiah's tomb, and when I was there, the Muslim community with the Christians together were caring for it, and they were very excited to show it to me.
yeah. Well,
And one
I
of the
was there and
Muslim
it was
leaders.
a Catholic caretaker, but I mean, yeah,
Well, I
it's
was there with the Peshmerga brought me there, and I met the different folks that were caring for it, and one of the Muslim leaders in the community said to me that they miss their cousins, and we know the role the Haganah and the Irgun played through their dark Zionism, with false flag terrorist attacks against their own community to scare them and get them to leave. And so that history is really quite tragic. And we're seeing that now even in Israel, the ethnic cleansing of the Jewish community by the European Jews, where you have, I don't know if you know, just 15 years ago, countless thousands of Ethiopian Jews were unknowingly, they thought they were having another procedure. They were forcibly sterilized by the
oh my
state.
heavens, no, I didn't know
Yes.
that.
So you see the other Jewish communities are treated as second-class citizens. You see especially the Jews from Ethiopia were even forcibly sterilized. And it is quite tragic, and when you think about the Christians in the Holy Land, you and I have both been there. That's their home. They're like
Oh,
the
it's a
idea
good
that they're
place to
being
go.
cleansed, and we're the most powerful country in the world, and I would say we as Catholics should be the most influential voice in this country, and yet we seem almost helpless to protect our co-religionists from an ideology that is promulgated in strip mall churches and auditoriums by not very smart people from religious denominations that are younger than my father.
I mean, I definitely, you know, I wake up with this question here, and it doesn't just fall to American Catholics, because, what is the patriarch doing? What is the Pope doing? Like there are all sorts of people involved in these conversations because there's worldwide implications here. Um, and I'm stuck at what happens next. I don't know what happens next. I know that we need to be praying. I know that, there certainly is a time to bend to the knee and put on sackcloth and ashes and pray that something changes. Because there certainly is this scenario right now where, again, I do not know what the world looks like if there is not a Christian in Bethlehem. It's the birthplace of our Savior. It's, the cave of the all holy God descending and showing his face for the first time. It's wrapped in mystery, it's wrapped in grace. There's something so significant about these sites that that in previous centuries people went to war over them. So I rack my brain here in terms of, what is the particular messaging, what is the particular um, uh, power that's needed to be unlocked in order for us to understand where where we go from here, because I think that, there certainly is a lot of pressure that could be applied to our allies, and there certainly is a lot of pressure that can be applied to our coalition partners in terms of coming to understand more deeply why this is so
And
significant.
our quote unquote coalition partners are not hesitant to try to put pressure on people like us to shut up, right? I'm constantly under pressure. Every time there's a settler attack, we do a news alert. And people are, I'm constantly under pressure to stop with these news alerts. I'm like, no, in fact, billboards are coming next. What do you mean stop? It's escalating. And so you're right. There is this battle with our quote unquote coalition partners that have become our adversaries when, advocating for the living stones of our faith. Even more important than these holy sites are the descendants of the apostles, those Jews that accepted Jesus 2,000 years ago. They live there today, and we call them Palestinian Christians. I want to switch topics to something practical. I think that we've kind of already hit on, which is the generational divide in the church. So there's the donor class, as the young people call them, the boomers, and then there's sort of everyone under 35. And what scares me is the illiberalism and the anger that we're seeing with young people, and sort of the aloofness and thoughtlessness for the plight of the young we're hearing from the old. When you look at a young person today,
Yeah.
their prospects for love and marriage and dating are being obliterated by these apps, by pornography, by OnlyFans. And we see, and by the way, the owner of OnlyFans is the largest donor to APAC, which is, and young people aren't, this is not lost on young people. They
Yeah.
will all tell you this,
Yeah.
that everything that's destroying our generation is owned by people that fund APAC. And then AI is destroying their hopes for a career. And they're told, don't worry, you'll get universal basic income. You won't have a wife, you won't have a career, but you'll have enough money to go on OnlyFans and order Taco Bell. And these kids are very, very, very angry. And when Pope Leo, when we were together, I said I knew why he took the name Pope Leo. He's going to give us an encyclical on AI and transhumanism, if you remember.
Yep.
I was so excited by that. So I think we do have a Holy Father that recognizes the horrible prospects that young people are looking to a very dark future. And, you know, Gen X and older just seems to be totally thoughtless. And so these young people see that we're not paying attention to their future. They see that we're not paying attention to the genocide in Gaza. Then they find a guy like Nick Fuentes who is talking on all of these issues. And so I think what's happening is people like Bishop Barron lack the courage to address these issues. Maybe he doesn't want to offend his boomer class donors, or maybe he's just a typical boomer who doesn't even see this. And then young people who are being radicalized because they're despairing and angry, especially young men, I think are becoming very, very angry. A new poll came out today that I think it's like 70% of young Republicans say Jews are a threat to our way of life. Just a poll that I saw that came out today. I think it was like 70%. So this should be concerning to everyone. But when you don't have Catholics looking at these problems seriously or addressing them seriously, young people are going to listen to those who are talking about those problems. Did I blather, or does that make sense? Or both?
Well, I think a little bit of both, Jay, but I definitely have seen the polling, for instance, on Iran and the support of the Iran war, and it's stratified on different ages, right? You know, and there's perhaps even a more interesting breakdown in that, you know, persons 59 and older support the war to historic degrees. Persons, you know, 35 and under, I think, if I'm recalling correctly, it was +8, and anyone who lived through the Iraq War basically is underwater. And
Oh,
so,
good,
you
good.
know, there's an interesting stratification happening. I think it's probably because of the way that our echo chambers can be formed on social media or on conventional media, or what source of, you know, are you watching television in order to receive your news? Are you watching X? What, you know, who's your algorithm determined by? But I think you're right to point out that um that there's something happening in this younger generation that has to be understood and um has to be shepherded. There's really a lot of despair. I think you're absolutely right that there's a lot going on there. I would say that there's, you know, an outsized influence of some of these persons who are unafraid of the sort of shock talk around some of these issues. Not always in the most helpful way. You know, I would speak out more against Nick Fuentes, but you know, he doesn't even believe in the 19th Amendment. So people who are already
But
down his
is Nick Fuentes a bigger problem than just the failure of anyone in the Catholic hierarchy in the United States to really mention the West Bank? To add, you know, there's a genocide that's happening,
yeah,
and I feel like there's been that the folks that we should look to speak on this have been utterly they've been cowards. And Nick Fuentes is a 26-year-old kid. And I know we like to throw his name around, but my frustration is this our biggest concern is we saw Artsakh ethnically cleansed by Azerbaijan and Israel 2 years ago. We had a Maronite priest murdered by Israel yesterday. You know, I have camera crews right now in Tehran with the Christian and Jewish communities documenting what they're going through in this war. And so I just think that there is a problem with the rise of Jew hatred, but I think it is caused by Zionism. by the crimes of the state of Israel and by the boomers saying that to criticize Israel is to be anti-Semitic. And then Gen Z hears this and goes, oh, so it's the Jews' fault, not the state of Israel's fault. And that's what Carrie was destroyed. They tried to destroy her, and they can't destroy anyone anymore. It's over. They're only destroying themselves. I call people like Babylon B and Ben Shapiro, they're just Israel's suicide drones because they're all done. Like, they don't know they're dead, but their careers are over, their future, they have no future. But, I think the real concern we have isn't with the Nick Fuentes with these young people who are angry. I think it's with the old folks who are cowards.
Well, I just wonder, since the absence of Charlie Kirk, where's the real model of youthful virility and masculinity that's authentically pursuing truth and Christian or Catholic, really willing to engage on these issues. I mean, I think that Charlie himself took a very radical stand against some of these questions and
Charlie was called an anti-Semite. He said that he thought October 7th was a false flag. He was aggressive in saying this war with Iran is stupid. He went to the White House and argued against it. And this is what leads to all these conspiracy theories. People ask, could this war in Iran have happened if Charlie Kirk wasn't killed? And I think the answer to that question is they could not have happened.
yeah, I mean, that's a question that we'll never know the answer to, but I certainly think that you're onto something in terms of his influence. But
Now, that doesn't mean I think Israel killed him. Okay, I just want to say that real
okay.
quick. But if I was 16, I'd think that.
Yeah, I certainly think that there's no shortage of people who are laboring under that impression. And I would say that, the real question here is not just identifying the problem, Jason, but the real question is here, okay, so then what vision do you put forward as as how to clarify consciences and move in a direction that's authentically for the common good, Catholic, authentically politically astute? Because I mean, I think that the question here is not just, okay, we have this divide here, but how do we bridge the divide? And what does that mean? Do we send out a recovery sub um for Gen Z? Do we send out a recovery sub for the boomers? I mean, there's a real question here about who do we go after in order to really bridge this gap, because I think I think that the problem that the young men are facing, and this is, I mean, when Aristotle talked about involving young people in politics, he was like, listen, nobody nobody young should be involved in
Plato said you shouldn't present yourself to public office till you're 50, I think it was, or your father
right.
dies, or
Yeah.
both, I think.
Yeah. Justice is the hardest virtue to really grapple with, and it requires a lot to understand, you know, what is owed to each. And so I think that, particularly as we move into, again, foreign policy, which is important, but is also a reflection of domestic policy, I think that we have to really first look at, okay, what's going on inside of these men? What's the motivating factor here? They want to be on the side of justice. They want to be on the side of something right. They want to advocate for the vulnerable. They want to be on the right side of history. Like, you could throw out and make all the memes you want about what that looks like, but that's what they're trying to do. So how do we understand that impulse and move that into something that's really beautiful? And I think that's what
They want
Charlie
love, they want
that's
family.
that's
They
what
may have
Charlie
never
was
known what a
trying
family
to
looks
do.
like. Mm?
Exactly. He's like, get married. Like, when you see these studies on Gen Z men versus women, right? Number 1 and 2 for the young men is, I want to get married and have a family. Number 12 and 13 for the women. So, there's a lot of work that has to be done here, but it's not just identifying the problem. It's also like, okay, so how do we give that future back to them? How do we give them, when you bring up the problems of AI, those are significant and serious. I mean,
Kelsey, I've made like 10 movies, written 4 books, and I'm dreading. Do I get to make any more movies? Do I get to write any more books? And I'm like, I'm an old man, I'm a grandfather.
yeah.
I can't imagine being 21 years old, dreaming of a life as a filmmaker, dreaming as a life of a writer, and going, There goes my dreams. And I'm a young man, and young women don't want to get married. There goes my hope of a family. But don't worry, we'll give you universal basic income. Whoa.
Oh, I mean,
This is a recipe for radicalization.
it is. The dignity of work, let's start there. The dignity of work is tremendous. And it's something that has been undercut at every turn through, as you mentioned, pornography, which, basically like fries your brain and gives you so much dopamine that you're not, getting off of the couch or doing whatever it is that you need. Marijuana, the legalization of marijuana, one of the most absolutely asinine experiments that we've undertaken in the United States. Same
And you're
effect.
coming to us from Colorado, the home of the
I'm
asinine
indeed.
experiment.
I left Colorado to enter the convent, and I came back and they had legalized it, and I said, Colorado went to pot. I mean, I could not believe the difference in just a few years through the legalization of marijuana, but it has the same effects, right? Again, it undercuts the human dignity at every turn. Your sense of going out of self, your ability to find love, your ability to find. Remember, man finds his greatest expression of self in self-gift. And everything that add in their social media, which is highly addictive, and then add in their artificial intelligence, which destroys, the nature of work. Who wants to work hard anymore? I mean, these things give their own dopamine reward systems if you're not already plugged into all these other, matrix-like visions that are feeding you a vision of fullness that you don't really have. So, I mean, the questions here are substantial and civilizational for society. How do we give men, and then also women, who's in that recovery project, how do we give men something to look forward to? I mean, they are starving right now for masculine leadership and for a vision of the future that right now does not exist.
And you know what's sad about that? The type of men you would want them to emulate cannot be influencers, right? I say they're looking at like these,
Yeah.
what do they call it, manly or masculine Christianity, but what we need is calloused hands Christianity, not men who do testosterone replacement and lift weights in their free time, which is fine if you want to do that, but that's nothing to emulate. That just means you're an upper middle class boomer with free time and income. But what we need is men that work hard, that volunteer for the local pregnancy center, that, rake the leaves for their elderly neighbor, that carry the burden of their family and their community. But that's just not something you're going to see on a TikTok reel. So I'm some young child, a young man living in the wasteland, looking for something. And what do I end up getting? I love martial arts. Our office used to be in the back of an MMA gym. But that's not manliness. That is the
No.
privilege of having good insurance. So when you
Yeah.
tear your meniscus, you can go get surgery and go back to work. You have free time. This has nothing to do with being a man. And these young kids think like being physically fit or doing a combat sport, this is what it is to be a man. And it's almost impossible. Like, how do we rescue these young men when they're definitely looking for it, right? They're definitely looking for it.
Right.
But what they need to see, the type of role model they need to see, they're not going to find on Instagram.
No, this is the question that I rack my brain about all the time, and I think the question also holds true for the young women. I mean, after 50 plus years of this last wave of feminism, I find very convincing a lot of the arguments about the wokeification of culture coming from the feminization of culture, specifically from the feminist movement. And so, how do we also recover, for those women, the sense of dignity, of perspective, of life? I mean, so Jason, I'm about 2 weeks away from giving birth, and every day I am like marveling. I'm like, oh my God, this is what my body is made for. Like, you hear it in so many philosophy classes. I studied it in the convent. I discerned out, and now I'm experiencing it. And I'm overwhelmed by how absolutely experiential it has to be for you to understand the joy of it, for you to understand like the miracle and just the marvel that you wake up every morning thinking about this little being that's growing inside of you, and you're like, holy crap, I I can grow a human being. Like, how are women, putting this 12th on their list?
12th on the list? What is it after? Cabo? What's it after? I don't even know.
It's
Like,
after, emotional security and psychological safety and, being able to have brunches with their girlfriends. And I mean, if you've ever experienced this, the just the miracle and the insanity, like I mean, I'm growing a boy. It's not even that like women can only grow women. It's like you're literally bringing into existence the human race of the opposite sex. I mean, it's so phenomenal, and you think there has to be a way to reach women to say, and I don't know, can it even be said? Because I heard it before and I thought it was beautiful, but when you experience it, it bowls you over. So
well, that's why I make
yeah,
movies too. And I shared with you one of my next movies. I really am focusing all my future films on Eros, the awakening of Eros in young people in a beautiful way, because it has, by the way, people are probably like, hey, Jason, she runs Catholic Vote here. What are you talking about? This youth culture. But I think this is the heart of political radicalization. It's when
yeah.
you block people off from love and from what they're created to do, to marriage and family and work. When you sever that, I think the biggest political problems we're going to be faced are caused by transhumanism. We're going to have lifespan inequality, by AI. There's going to be large segments of our population unemployed, without prospects of love. The beautiful I was so lucky to become a father at 18. Now I was very scared, like frightened. But when I cut my son's umbilical cord as an 18-year-old boy, such a beautiful experience. And I remember being 18, pushing my child around the mall, and people would look at me and feel sorry for me, going, "Oh, look at that baby that had a baby." But I never felt sorry for myself. I was so happy. This weekend I had a rough couple weeks at, war is my business. And unfortunately, business has been good and a bit overwhelming recently for us. But it was my grandson's birthday, his 7th birthday. He went from 6 to 7. So I had to see this all week. 6, 7, grandpa went from 6 to 7, 6, 7. And we went to a water park, me and some of my children and my grandchildren. And like you said, I said to my wife as we were sitting there by the wave pool, I said, all of my work is that every father can do this. Like, I just wish everyone could sit safely with a margarita, even though it's Lent, and 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 watching my children play in the wave pool with my grandchildren. This is the most beautiful thing. And we're not in politics for politics' sake. We're in it to create a humane and beautiful society for our children to live in. Yes, that's why a Catholic Vote exists.
Oh, it's also, Jay, why we share, an overlapping look at through a new culture project that we have. So we've actually launched something that's trying to get upstream of politics, in a certain way, which is the Zeal platform. And what we do there is we're trying to bring together podcast voices, news articles, and short films, um, docuseries, things that allow people to really get ahead of, okay, so politics is this politics and culture in kind of a swirling stream, right? You can have laws that influence culture and you can have culture that influences laws. So they go back and forth, but sometimes it's just really helpful to get upstream of some of those questions and to really light the imagination on fire with what it means to be, a person looking for a life with intention. And so we're running a show right now called Flourish, with a Gen Z woman, because we want to show the beauty of this young mom trying to live her life with intention. And she just goes around interviewing people, and it's a really beautiful thing.
Oh, I can't wait to share with my daughter, who's a young mom living in Japan. So I need to send that to her.
Yeah, well, and I want to see these new films that you have, because obviously I think that there's a lot, that we can look at when you can inspire the imagination. I mean, everyone racks their brains about how to solve these political problems, and sometimes what we just need is a greater vision of what it means to be fully human. And so if we can understand what the dream is, then maybe we can build a world that looks a little bit more like that, or build a bridge to that world that allows people to experience it. But if young people are so frustrated and never experience eros, as you mentioned, which I think is really true in an instrumentalized, over sexualized culture, then it's very difficult to wake up one day and say, you know what I want? A wife and a family, because you've just,
Even
it's
when they say they
never
want it, they're not
in
doing
the
it because
imagination.
it's
Yeah.
they say they want it, but it's scary. It takes courage. I have men my age, Catholic men, you know who you are, my age. I've been for 35 years. You're like complaining you can't find a good woman. There are good Catholic women everywhere. And I was like, you're just a coward. You're afraid you're going to get divorced.
Yeah.
I was afraid I'm a Catholic adult convert. My parents together, I think, had 10 marriages. Okay. Um, my great grandmother had 7 marriages. My family, we've been upstream of culture, unfortunately, not in a good way. Like we're trendsetters. And so when I became a cat, I was married at 18. I was an atheist and then divorced at 24 and then became Catholic at 30, married at 32. And I remember being really, really petrified that I would fail. And then as a Catholic, failing meant it was catastrophic. What did it mean to get divorced? Could I not go to community? All of these things. It's very, very scary. We are coming out of the wasteland, but be brave. Like the dragon you want to fight is right here. Fall in love, get married, have a family. This is how we save civilization. Politics, Andrew Breitbart was one of my best friends. Do you know we never talked politics? We talked about our family. We talked about baseball. We talked about punk rock music, for real. And I would always have my
Oh,
phone on
rocks.
punk. He loves punk. I would have my phone on speaker. So if anyone calls me, you should assume my wife's listening because it's always on speaker because I don't want brain cancer. Okay. And so I'll be sitting there with the phone and my wife would say, don't you guys talk about politics? Never. Why? Politics is a means to an end. An
Yeah.
end is going to a punk rock concert with your friends. An end is sitting on a lawn chair watching your kids play Little League. An end is your son, like my son, telling me he's on his way to becoming a master electrician, and he's so proud and so happy. And I told him he's gonna be the last person on earth with a job are these electricians, right? AI is gonna feed us all
Yeah.
into the furnace and you'll be helping them. But this is what life is about. And I want to say this about Catholic Vote. At Vulnerable People Project, my job is very simple. Just relentlessly advocate for the needs of vulnerable communities. I don't have to be very graceful. I don't have to be careful. I run through the minefields. And if I set mines off, I'm like, good, there's
Right.
one less mine.
Yeah.
But what you do at Catholic Vote to me is so challenging. And you have people where I'm sitting and people maybe that disagree with me on core issues over here, but we all fall under the Catholic Vote umbrella. And for us to have any influence on our culture, you need to keep these cats together. You need to herd cats.
Yeah.
And it's become almost impossible. But you're doing a very good job. And I want to thank you also. And everyone should get The Loop, which I believe is probably, you may know, I mean, I don't know the exact numbers, but I know how influential. I can't imagine there's a more influential email that gets sent into people's email box in this country politically than The Loop. Everyone needs to get The Loop. It's very influential. So I just want to commend you for. I don't know how you balance this. I really, it is quite the challenge, and it's a special gift. I could not work for Catholic Vote. Don't ever hire me if I apply for a job. It'll be a disaster. Be a disaster. But I really commend you. And then I thank you for Zeal, which just launched, and it's so professional and it's so exciting. And I'm glad to see the Catholic Vote, although to me, Zeal shows that you get it. Politics isn't about politics.
Yeah.
Politics is about families having a wonderful place to live and be and pray and worship God and love each other.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's the dream is, that if we can gather these Catholics together, if we can, our job, Jason, is to be leaven in the culture. And so if Catholics can gather together, 70 million strong, and really show people what it's like to live for Christ, show people the importance of family, show people, why we believe that children are a blessing, show people, that justice does have its place, and the rule of law is important, and yet, we can care for the vulnerable, and we can care for so many more if we have those standards in place. I think this is exactly why we exist, is to be able to say to those that don't have the faith, that don't have the gospel, let's build a civilization of love together, and let's really work at having a place that we all want to live in, because it's a grace to be here, and God has placed us on this earth at this time in this moment for a certain reason. And we have some hand. We're co-workers in God's vineyard, right? Like, we're not just um puppets that get moved around. We have some hand in building the society that we want to live in. And so, that's my plea and my appeal as president of Catholic Vote is, let's take a look at the best of what it is that we offer, the truth, goodness, and beauty of Catholicism, and saturate the world with it. And, it's going to be messy, it's going to be difficult. We're going to have times where we disagree on prudential issues, but animated by the faith, which we know to be true, we can arrive at something that's really spectacular.
Well, and it's such a blessing to our country because can you imagine all of these debates right now happening in our country without the Catholic voice?
No,
It would be
awful
horrifying, really.
would.
And so the church has been a great blessing, and lay Catholics participating in public life have been a great blessing. What is there? I want to end on this. I want you to tell us how we can be involved with Catholic Vote and watch Zeal and what we should be watching. But also, are there any issues left that unite us? I feel like I worked for the RNC in the early 2000s on on the Catholic Vote, on the Catholic Coalition. We had same sex, we had traditional marriage, we had life, we had end of life issues, we had these real points of unity. We had disagreements. I opposed the invasion of Iraq. Even I think the USCCB supported it, but the Holy Father didn't. Um, but more or less, we were united. Is there any area of unity left in our coalition? And what is that?
Jason, as far as I can tell, the greatest area of unity and advancement is MAHA, is Make America Healthy.
Oh,
And I actually think that there's a lot of promise here, and I'd like to see Catholic Vote really wade into this, because there's a new redefinition of a spiritual human anthropology happening in this movement. And there's a lot of good for children, for families, for moms, being accomplished in this. We need to give far more momentum to it so that it can continue on the path that it's done. I mean, I think we could be looking at the redefinition of healthcare. I mean, which would be phenomenal on so many different levels, from an end to the ideological capture on abortion and pharmaceuticals that are antithetical to life, and really just looking at, again, what makes us healthy, what makes us community, what makes us come together. A lot of it is around food. A lot of
you
it is,
nailed it. It's soccer moms. It's
yeah,
Gen Z. My kids are health freaks. They will get mad at me if I eat McDonald's. Right now, two of my children are skiing in Japan, and my one son, who just graduated high school, is doing a gap year to climb the highest peaks in every country in Europe over the next 12 months.
amazing.
And he's a health. So I think you nailed it. I never really thought of that. It transcends the boomers and the Gen Zs and everyone in between. Really are united around Maha.
Yeah,
You
I
need to
think
tell the
so.
White House to start front shelving Maha and slow down with the wars.
I believe me, I am.
Slow down with the wars. And now, how can we? I really do think
Yeah.
everyone. I don't want, and I don't think it's this. Um, I think it's fair to say that Trump is president because of Catholic Vote. Now, why? Not because Catholic Vote changed, uh, tried to advocate for Trump's positions, but Trump really articulated positions that were very attractive to people like me on peace, on war, even on immigration. He said, "We love immigrants. We just want them here legally." I feel like he's governed differently than he ran. You don't need to address that, but I feel, but I do think your presence changed how he spoke as a candidate. And I do think, and I'm about to write a Substack on this, this war is an aberration for Trump, and I think he's gonna really regret it, and I think this will weigh on him for the rest of his life. I really do. I think this is something that he's gonna be like, "What was I lured into?" He's going to be very upset, something I believe. But, Catholic vote going forward, you've done such a great job so far of just holding the line, but then you have a man that really was, like, drawn to you, drawn to us as a community. Um, how do you go forward, continuing to hold that line, and then how do we're gonna have candidates that tell us what we wanna hear and then don't do it. Happens all the time. This is politics. But how are you going to do that going forward, and how do we become a part of it?
Yeah. I think this is where it becomes, extremely strategic to look at, what are the particular initiatives that we can support. Obviously, I too, have a lot of concerns, particularly in the pro-life vein. There have been a lot of you know, hallucinations, I guess, that mifepristone could be overturned, or that, some of these things that the pro-life community is rightfully upset about. So I think we're just looking at this point, without the same lever of pressure as a presidential election, how do we use our voices, and how do we marshal our um our collective strengths together. And I think that's one, by holding firm with numbers, and showing that we are significant, and that you can't argue your way around us or act in a way that circumvents us. And I think that means, being involved in the coalition. The first thing though is really prayer, in my opinion, Jason. So many of the evils that we face politically have a very deep spiritual root. Catholic Vote has launched a prayer for the nation, um, with Cardinal Burke, where we are imploring the Sacred Heart of Jesus every day during this America 250 year to really reconsecrate our nation to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. And I was happy that the bishops took this up as well, and that they're pushing this. I think that we need to really look at reframing renewal and repentance before we move into the political sphere. That's what's going to give the energy to a lot of this stuff. When I talk with Billy Graham's people, man who worked with him for over 3 decades, said, we used to go into a city, we would never talk about selling out the seats. We would just talk about converting hearts. And as soon as we left the city, the bars, not Catholic, the bars would become emptier. Um, you know, the seedier places in town, crime would dry up. I mean, amazing things happen when grace is at work in people's lives. And so
Well,
I think those conversion elements are first and a priori before a political movement gets started.
how do we join this do we sign up to say
Yeah,
we're
yeah.
praying
So you can join us at our culture project, www.zeal, zeale.co. So we've got an extra E on the end there of Zeal, zeal.co. And you can join us. You can sign up for our daily prayer by Cardinal Burke. You can see all of our culture changing project videos and podcasts. And then there you can also sign up for The Loop, which is the new home for our most influential informed citizen newsletter, daily email that comes to your inbox. So just join us there at zeal.co, because everything significant has to first start with grace and with God. And unless the Lord builds the house in vain, to the builder's labor. So we're trying to build something here that's significant and lasting, and overturning some of the capture that Satan has on our society, and let's do it together.
and you said it's zeale.co, not
Dot
com,
co.
so .co.
That's right.
That's great. So we'll put it in the show notes, and I just wanna say this too, that last year you quietly, I hope you don't mind me saying, but you quietly, Catholic Vote quietly supported our work. I reached out to a lot of organizations. You were one of only 2 that said, "Well, we'd love to help." And you funded, I think, thousands of meals, 10,000 meals, I forget, thousands of meals that we delivered to the only Catholic church in Gaza at a really difficult time, and they were hot meals. And I cannot thank you enough for standing with us as we did this. And I know when you cover our work in the loop, I we get more of a response than if we're on Fox News or on any other outlet. That's the power of the loop. And so
Yeah.
everyone really needs to get the loop. Just that is where the conversation is taking place in our community. And and I like with Zeal, I like the news format of it all. I like how we don't always have to editorialize on everything that's prudential. I think it's really smart that sometimes it's just straight. This is what happened.
Yep.
And I really do appreciate that. And I can't believe you're doing all of this. Well, this is why men can't give birth, because we for 9 months would be on the couch. I mean, like 2 weeks before giving birth, we'd for like 9 months.
My
Um,
my husband tells me all the time that the world would not repopulate if men had to be pregnant, so
no, yeah. If we had to give birth, marriage and family would be 14th on our list too. Can I when 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 my son Maximilian Colby was born, you'll appreciate this. It was when the morning after pill was about to be made over the counter. It was August of 2005. And we were the only, I make people mad all the time because I feel like my job is to say it when it's not easy to say. And so I stood up to the Bush administration and to von Aschenbach, who was the head of the FDA at the time. And we were really pressuring them to not make the morning after pill available over the counter. Sadly, at the time, most pro-life groups punted. One pro-life leader told me, if we come out against this, we won't be invited to the Christmas party this year. And I was like, that's December. This is August. You're thinking about a Christmas party. But here's my point. I was the only one willing to do media on this. And so my wife, as she was in labor, she said I could do radio shows and TV shows until she started to crown. And
Oh
so
my
Fox
god.
News sent a camera crew to the hospital. Then I'm literally in the room with her, holding her hand. And then the doctor was like, you need to get off the radio show. So, but the difference between you and I is the baby was not in me, but
Yep.
you're carrying your baby. You're 2 weeks from birth and you're here working and you look lovely. So we can't thank you enough.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me on. We appreciate Vulnerable People Project and just the provision that you guys make for Christians in Gaza, for the moral voices. I mean, I think that there's room for a lot of people in our coalition, and we need people to be brave and to be thinking about those that are underserved. So we also appreciate what you do.
Do you remember the commercial with Mikey, the cereal? That will give it to Mikey. Mikey will eat anything.
Yep.
That's VPP's job. Like, what? Give it to Jason, he'll do anything. So, I understand that it's not always it's challenging. Um, but we need organizations like yours that can build a broad coalition that gives us the ability to influence. And I couldn't be more grateful for Catholic Vote and your leadership, and your team over there. So, you get back to, whatever it is, whatever you're craving. What do you have any cravings?
Besides ice cream, potatoes.
Potatoes?
Potatoes.
Did you have this craving before in your life? Did you ever
No,
crave potatoes before?
no, no, never.
That is very interesting.
Yeah. Who knows
Maybe
what sort of complete amino acid structure my child needs in order to have
and do we know a boy or girl? Or are you not saying?
boy, boy, James
Or
Dominic.
maybe he's gonna play basketball in Idaho.
Maybe so. He already has I have a brother who's a basketball coach for college, and he's already offered an NIL deal in the womb.
He's already got a deal. Does he coach does he coach for a college in Idaho?
No, he Wyoming up. So
Oh, close.
yeah,
Oh.
close.
It's
Yeah.
close. All right, Kelsey, we'll get to your potatoes and ice
Okay.
cream. It sounds wonderful.
Okay. God bless.
All right, bye-bye. I'm gonna land the plane. All right, guys, you need to subscribe to The Loop. You need to follow Zeal. The next 2 years, the next 4 years are going to be really crucial for our republic. And again, without the Catholic voice, many of us disagree within the Catholic community on these issues. But I think the one thing all of us who disagree are grounded in a commitment to human dignity. And the reason sometimes we disagree so passionately is because the stakes are so high. But what we bring as a community to the debate is a thoughtfulness to the vulnerable, grounded in our understanding of the Imago Dei, which, by the way, it's the 250th anniversary of this republic, which is founded on anthropology. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. What does that mean? That is a Catholic teaching. It comes from the Catholic Church. And it came through the Anglosphere, through the Magna Carta and the Glorious Revolution, then it made it to the United States. But this idea, we're the only republic founded on a vision of the human person. We're the only country in the history of the world that I know of that is founded on anthropology, and it is Catholic anthropology given to us by the grandchildren of Puritans. How interesting is that? And today it is Catholics in the United States that are, people get annoyed with us because we're constantly henpecking for the vulnerable, reminding people of the inviolable dignity of the human person, reminding folks that we can't do evil, that good would come of it. And that's what, to me, makes Catholic Vote the most important organization of its kind in the country. So make sure you go there. This episode, as always, is brought to you by the Vulnerable People Project, standing in solidarity with the most vulnerable people in the world when the world is left. It has been tough here. Right now, we have crews in Tel Aviv and in Tehran filming the damage, standing with the Christian communities in Tehran and the Jewish communities, documenting their experience in the war as we are in Tel Aviv. And this is something we'll be able to present to you soon. But please pray for our teams on the ground that are exposed to incredible hazards. Just yesterday, our team in Tehran sent me photos of them covered in what looked like oil, but it was just black water falling from the sky. So please keep all of our teams in your prayers. Go to vulnerablepeopleproject.com. Look around, see what we do. If you're impressed, donate. If you're not impressed, what do we got to do to impress you? It's pretty impressive. All right, guys, until next time, it's the Jason Jones Show.